On January 17, 1920, the United States made every drop of alcohol in New York City a federal crime. The next morning, there were more places to get a drink than there had been the day before. Within 2 years, Manhattan had thousands of speakeasies behind barbershop doors and basement stairways. The drinks were mixed from smuggled rye, redistilled industrial alcohol, and homemade gin cooked in copper pots never meant to touch liquor. Bartenders invented cocktails not for flavor, but to mask the taste of something that could hurt you. Number 19 on this list was cooked in apartment bathtubs across the Lower East Side. Number 3 was named after the exact distance where the law could not touch the men who brought it in. And number 1 killed more Americans than any gangster ever did. Hit that subscribe button because what New Yorkers swallowed just to keep drinking says more about this city than any history book. Here are 25 illegal drinks New Yorkers actually ordered in Prohibition speakeasies. Number 25. Gin Rickey. The original was nothing more than gin, fresh lime juice, and carbonated water, served over ice in a tall glass. Before Prohibition, it was a gentleman's drink, ordered in hotel lobbies and political clubs across Washington and New York. Once the Volstead Act turned every bar in the city into a crime scene, the Gin Rickey became one of the most commonly ordered drinks in speakeasies for one reason: it was cheap to make. Bootleg gin was the easiest spirit to produce illegally, lime juice was legal, and carbonated water cost almost nothing. The fizz and the citrus also did a decent job of covering up the harsh chemical taste of poorly distilled homemade gin. A bartender who could squeeze a good lime and pour fast could serve dozens of Gin Rickeys an hour without running low on anything except ice. For a lot of New Yorkers, this was their first illegal drink, ordered in a basement they found through a friend of a friend who knew which door to knock on. Number 24. The Highball. Take a glass, pour in whiskey, top it with ginger ale, and hand it across the bar. The Highball was the fastest drink a speakeasy bartender could make, and speed mattered when a raid could come through the door at any second. Most speakeasies kept a system for exactly that. Bartenders worked behind hinged shelves that could fold down into the wall. If someone yelled the code word, every bottle went behind the panel, and whatever was left in the glass looked like plain ginger ale. The Highball survived Prohibition better than almost any other drink because it required no skill, no exotic ingredients, and no time. One bootleg pour, one legal mixer, one glass. A man could be holding evidence, and no officer could prove it unless they caught the open bottle. It was the perfect drink for a city living on borrowed time every night. Number 23. The Bronx Cocktail. Gin, sweet vermouth, dry vermouth, and fresh orange juice, shaken and strained into a cocktail glass. Before Prohibition, this was one of the most popular drinks in New York. During the dry years, it stayed popular for the same reason so many gin cocktails did. Orange juice and vermouth buried the chemical edge of bootleg gin better than almost anything a bartender could reach for. The Bronx was a regular order at the more upscale speakeasies, the kind that operated behind restaurant fronts in Midtown and charged accordingly. If you had enough money and knew the right doorman, you could sit at a white tablecloth table and drink something that tasted almost civilized. The illegality was identical. The presentation just cost more. Number 22. Whiskey Sour. Whiskey, lemon juice, and sugar, shaken with ice and served in a short glass. The recipe is older than the Civil War, but during Prohibition, the whiskey sour took on a different purpose. The lemon and sugar were not there for balance. They were there for survival. Bootleg whiskey in the early 1920s was rough. Some of it came from rural stills that used car radiators as condensers, leaving traces of lead in every batch. The whiskey sour turned that into something a person could swallow without gagging. Bartenders squeezed the lemon hard and poured the sugar heavy, because the worse the whiskey, the more cover it needed. A good whiskey sour in a speakeasy was not a sign of craft, it was a sign the liquor was terrible. Number 21. Ward 8. Whiskey, lemon juice, orange juice, and grenadine, shaken and served up. The drink was named after a voting district in Boston, but New York Speakeasies adopted it quickly because it checked every box a Prohibition bartender needed. The grenadine and double citrus created enough sweetness and acid to mask nearly anything poured as the base. The deep red color also made it easy for regulars to order without speaking too loudly. In a room where anyone could be a federal agent, pointing at someone else's red drink was safer than saying the word whiskey. The Ward 8 was not glamorous, and nobody ever called it elegant. It was practical, and during Prohibition, practical kept you drinking and out of a cell. Number 20. Clover Club. Gin, raspberry syrup, lemon juice, and a raw egg white, shaken until it foamed pink. The Clover Club existed before Prohibition as a cocktail associated with a Philadelphia men's club, but it found a second life in New York speakeasies for a reason nobody talks about. The egg white created a thick, creamy head on the drink that looked and tasted nothing like alcohol. A woman sitting in a speakeasy disguised as a tea room could sip a Clover Club and appear to be drinking a fruit smoothie. During Prohibition, women entered the drinking public in numbers that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier, and drinks like this gave them cover. The foam was not decoration. The foam was plausible deniability. Number 19. Bathtub Gin. The name was not a joke. People actually made it in their bathtubs. The process started with grain alcohol, usually bought or stolen from industrial suppliers who were still legally permitted to produce it for manufacturing purposes. A bootlegger would pour the alcohol into a large vessel, often a bathtub because it was the biggest container in a city apartment, and cut it with water to bring the proof down to something a person could drink without going blind. Then came the flavoring. Juniper oil was the key ingredient that made it taste like gin. Some producers used real juniper berries crushed and steeped in the alcohol. Others used juniper extract bought from pharmacies. The worst operators used turpentine or other pine-scented chemicals that came close enough to fool a tongue that was already burning. Glycerin was added to give the liquid body. Without it, bathtub gin felt thin and sharp on the palate, more like rubbing alcohol than anything meant for drinking. Some makers added citric acid or sugar to soften the edge. The final product was bottled in whatever glass was available, corked, and sold to speakeasy owners who asked no questions about what was inside. The danger was real. There was no regulation and no inspection, so the quality changed from batch to batch even within the same producer. One bottle might taste rough but drinkable. The next might contain enough methanol to cause permanent blindness. New York hospitals treated a steady stream of patients whose doctors wrote down alcoholic poisoning, but the cause was not how much they drank. It was what they drank. Bathtub gin was the backbone of the Prohibition speakeasy economy and one of its most reliable killers. Number 18. Jack Rose. Applejack brandy, grenadine, and lime juice, shaken and strained. Applejack was an American spirit with roots going back to the colonial era, made by freezing hard apple cider and removing the ice to concentrate the alcohol. During Prohibition, it had one enormous advantage over other spirits. Apple orchards were everywhere, cider was legal, and the freezing process required no still, no copper tubing, and no equipment that could be seized by federal agents. Farmers in upstate New York and New Jersey produced Applejack in their barns and shipped it into the city through the same roads that moved Canadian whiskey. The Jack Rose became a speakeasy staple, not because it was fashionable, but because Applejack was one of the few American-made spirits that was genuinely and reliably available. The grenadine and lime were there to smooth it out. The apple did the rest. Number 17. Mary Pickford. White rum, pineapple juice, grenadine, and a splash of maraschino liqueur, named after the movie star. The drink arrived in New York speakeasies through the rum pipeline that ran from Havana to the East Coast. Cuba was close, rum was cheap to produce, and the Caribbean shipping lanes were harder for the Coast Guard to patrol than the Canadian border. The Mary Pickford worked because it tasted like tropical punch that happened to contain enough rum to justify the price. For customers tired of the harsh grain spirits that dominated the New York bootleg market, a rum cocktail with real fruit juice felt like a vacation from Prohibition itself. The rum was smoother than anything distilled on the mainland, and the pineapple juice made it feel almost innocent. Number 16. The sidecar, cognac, orange liqueur, and lemon juice, served in a sugar-rimmed glass. The sidecar was a European import that arrived in New York through transatlantic smuggling. French cognac and Cointreau were shipped across the ocean in crates labeled as olive oil, machine parts, or vinegar. A bottle of cognac that cost a modest sum in France could sell for many times that amount in a Manhattan speakeasy. The sidecar became the drink of the wealthier patrons, the ones who could afford spirits that had actually been aged in a barrel instead of colored with shoe polish in a warehouse. Ordering one was not just ordering a drink. It was proving you had connections to someone who had connections to a boat. Number 15. French 75. Gin, lemon juice, sugar, and champagne served in a tall glass. The cocktail was named after the French 75mm field gun used in the First World War because it was said to hit with the same force. In Prohibition-era New York, the French 75 was one of the most expensive illegal drinks a person could order because it required 2 smuggled ingredients instead of 1. The champagne had to cross the Atlantic past customs officials, Coast Guard patrols, and at least 2 middlemen before it reached a speakeasy in Midtown. Every glass represented a small miracle of international smuggling. It was the kind of drink you ordered when you wanted the whole room to know you could afford to break 2 laws at once. Number 14. The Manhattan. Rye whiskey, sweet vermouth, and a dash of aromatic bitters stirred and strained into a cocktail glass. The Manhattan is New York's cocktail, and during Prohibition, ordering one was both a point of pride and an act of defiance. The problem was the rye. Before the Volstead Act, American rye whiskey was produced in distilleries across Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Kentucky. Once those distilleries shut down, the supply of real aged rye dried up within months. What replaced it was a chemical approximation. Bootleggers bought neutral grain alcohol and added caramel coloring for the amber hue and various flavorings to simulate depth. The bitters and vermouth in a Manhattan did their best to make this drinkable. Some speakeasy operators went to extraordinary lengths to secure real pre-Prohibition rye. Cases that had been warehoused before the ban became almost priceless. A genuine bottle of aged American rye, distilled before 1920, circulated through a private network of wealthy drinkers and connected bar owners who treated it the way collectors treat rare paintings. For everyone else, the Manhattan was made with whatever the bootlegger delivered that week. The bartender adjusted the vermouth and bitters to compensate. A heavy pour of sweet vermouth meant the base spirit was especially rough. A light pour meant the whiskey was at least passable. Regular customers learned to read the proportions like a code. They knew by the color in the glass what kind of night it was going to be. The best speakeasies kept 2 bottles behind the bar. 1 real, 1 counterfeit. Regulars who tipped well got the genuine pour. First-timers got the blend. The Manhattan was the same drink with the same name, but what was actually in the glass depended entirely on who you were and how well the bartender knew your face. It tasted different every week, but ordering one in a New York speakeasy never stopped meaning the same thing. This was their city, and nobody was going to tell them what they could drink in it. Number 13. Corpse Reviver, number 2. Gin, orange liqueur, Lillet Blanc, lemon juice, and a rinse of absinthe. The recipe appeared in a bartender's guide with the instruction to drink it before 11 in the morning, or whenever you needed to come back from the dead. In speakeasies, the Corpse Reviver served a specific function. It was a hangover cure ordered by people who had been drinking the night before and needed to function by noon. The absinthe rinse gave it an anise flavor that cut through the fog of a rough morning. The citrus and herbal liqueur settled the stomach, while the gin put enough alcohol back in the system to stop the shaking. This was not recreational drinking. This was maintenance, and speakeasy regulars treated it the way a mechanic treats motor oil. The machine needed it to keep running. Number 12. The scofflaw. Rye whiskey, dry vermouth, lemon juice, grenadine, and a dash of orange bitters, shaken and strained. The word scofflaw was coined in 1924 through a newspaper contest. A wealthy Prohibition supporter offered a cash prize for the best new word to describe someone who drank illegally, and scofflaw won. Within weeks, bartenders had named a cocktail after it. The drink was an act of linguistic defiance. Every time someone ordered one, they were calling themselves the exact thing the temperance movement tried to shame them into not being. The recipe was balanced and citrus-forward, but the name was the real point. It turned an insult into a toast. In a Prohibition speakeasy, ordering a scofflaw was the equivalent of raising your glass directly to the law and drinking it down with a grin. Number 11. The bee's knees, gin, honey, and lemon juice, shaken and served up. The name was 1920s slang for the best of the best, and the cocktail earned it by solving the biggest problem in every speakeasy in New York. Bootleg gin tasted awful. The bee's knees was engineered to fix that. Honey is one of the most effective flavor-masking agents in the natural world. Its thick sweetness coats the tongue before the alcohol hits, and its own complex flavor competes with the harsh chemical notes of poorly distilled gin. The lemon added acid to cut through the sweetness and further disguise whatever was underneath. A well-made bee's knees could turn dangerous bathtub gin into something that tasted almost pleasant. It was not created for flavor. It was created for survival. Bartenders who could make a good one kept their customers coming back alive, and in Prohibition-era New York, keeping people alive and keeping a speakeasy open were the same job. Number 10. The South Side. Gin, lime juice, simple syrup, and fresh mint, shaken and strained. The South Side has a disputed origin, with claims linking it to the South Side of Chicago, to Long Island social clubs, and to the 21 Club in Manhattan. What is not disputed is that it was one of the most ordered drinks in upscale New York speakeasies throughout the 1920s. The mint was the key. Fresh mint leaves muddled into the drink gave the South Side an herbal quality that made it taste clean in a way almost nothing else on a speakeasy menu could match. For customers who wanted to forget they were drinking illegal liquor mixed in someone's apartment, the South Side came closest. It tasted like a garden party. The fact that the garden was a basement on 52nd Street did not seem to bother anyone. Number 9. The Last Word. Equal parts gin, green chartreuse, maraschino liqueur, and fresh lime juice, shaken and strained. This was a cocktail of extraordinary complexity for a drink served in places that were not supposed to exist. Green chartreuse alone was made from over 100 botanical ingredients by monks in the French Alps, and smuggling it into New York required the same transatlantic networks that moved cognac and champagne. The recipe demanded exact equal proportions, which made it difficult for bartenders working fast in dim, crowded rooms. But when made correctly, the Last Word was one of the few speakeasy cocktails that could genuinely impress someone who remembered what good liquor tasted like before the ban. It was proof that even in the middle of a national experiment in forced sobriety, the craft of making something beautiful out of illegal ingredients refused to die. Number 8. Champagne cocktail. A sugar cube soaked in aromatic bitters, placed at the bottom of a glass and topped with chilled champagne. This was the most flagrantly expensive illegal drink a person could order. Champagne had to be smuggled across the Atlantic, landed on remote beaches, and driven into the city undercover. By the time a bottle reached a speakeasy, its price had multiplied several times over. The champagne cocktail was ordered by people who wanted everyone in the room to see how little they cared about the law. The sugar and bitters were almost beside the point. They justified calling it a cocktail rather than a straight pour. Speakeasy owners loved the markup. Customers loved feeling, for one glass at least, like the life they remembered before. January 1920 had not completely disappeared. Number 7. The Sazerac. Rye whiskey, sugar, Peychaud's bitters, and an absinthe rinse, served in a chilled glass with a lemon peel. The Sazerac was born in New Orleans and migrated north through the same underground networks that carried jazz into Manhattan. Ordering one required 2 ingredients that were especially hard to find. The rye was scarce for the same reasons that plagued every whiskey cocktail, and Peychaud's bitters, produced by a single company in Louisiana, became nearly impossible to source once supply chains collapsed. Some bartenders substituted Angostura and hoped nobody noticed. Regulars noticed every time. The Sazerac also called for absinthe, which had been banned in the United States since 1912, 8 years before Prohibition started. Ordering one meant violating 2 separate federal prohibitions at the same time, which in certain speakeasies was considered a selling point. Number 6. Sweet whiskey. This was not a cocktail with a name anyone was proud of. Sweet whiskey was what bootleggers called their house product. Industrial grain alcohol mixed with water, colored with caramel, and sweetened with sugar syrup or glycerin to approximate the taste of aged bourbon. Every speakeasy in New York served some version of it. The production happened in warehouses across Brooklyn and New Jersey. A bootlegger would buy or steal industrial alcohol and rectify it by running it through charcoal, adding flavoring, and bottling it with counterfeit labels from real distilleries. Some sweet whiskey was merely unpleasant. Some was genuinely toxic. The sugar and glycerin made it smooth enough to drink fast, and fast was often the point. In a city where the police could walk through the door at any moment, nobody wanted to nurse their glass. You drank it fast, you ordered another, and you did not ask what was in the bottle. Number 5. Needle beer. The Volstead Act contained a loophole that allowed production and sale of near beer, a malt beverage with an alcohol content below 0.5%. Breweries stayed open by making this legal product, and speakeasy operators found a way to turn it into something else. Needle beer was near beer that had been re-injected with alcohol using a syringe through the bottle cap. The process was exactly as crude as it sounds. A bootlegger would take a hypodermic needle, draw up grain alcohol, push it through the metal cap, and shake the bottle to mix. The result looked identical to legal near beer. The label was real. The cap was intact. A federal agent could pick up the bottle and see nothing wrong. The problem was dosage. There was no way to control how much alcohol went into each bottle. Some came out at the strength of a normal lager. Others were strong enough to put a grown man on the floor after 2. Bartenders had no idea what they were serving, and customers had no idea what they were drinking. Needle beer was everywhere in New York during Prohibition. It was cheaper than spirits, it looked innocent, and it could be produced in enormous quantities with almost no equipment. For a lot of working-class New Yorkers who could not afford the prices at upscale speakeasies, needle beer was the only illegal drink they ever ordered. It came in a familiar bottle, it tasted close enough to real beer, and the only difference was that this one could actually do what beer was supposed to do. That difference was worth the risk every time. For the breweries making the original near beer, the arrangement was an open secret. They produced the base product knowing exactly where most of it ended up. The legal beer went out the front door. The bootleggers were waiting at the loading dock with their syringes and their cash. Number 4. Smoke. Smoke was the street name for drinks made from redistilled, denatured industrial alcohol. The federal government, in an effort to stop people from drinking industrial alcohol during Prohibition, ordered manufacturers to add poisons to their products. These denaturants included methanol, kerosene, benzene, formaldehyde, and other chemicals designed to make the alcohol undrinkable. Bootleggers hired chemists to redistill the denatured alcohol and remove the poisons. Some of those chemists were competent, many were not. The resulting product was sold cheaply to speakeasies and blind pigs across the city. Customers who drank it reported burning in the throat, severe headaches, and temporary vision problems. In the worst cases, the methanol was not fully removed, and the drinker went blind or died. Smoke was not ordered by name. It was simply the cheapest pour behind the bar, and the people who reached for it usually had no other option. The government had poisoned the supply on purpose, and the people drinking it were the ones who paid the price. Number 3. The 12-mile limit. This cocktail got its name from the line drawn in the ocean. In 1924, the United States pushed its jurisdiction out to 12 nautical miles from the coast, trying to stop the flotilla of rum runners anchoring just offshore and ferrying crates of Caribbean rum, Scotch whiskey, and French brandy into Manhattan under cover of darkness. The drink itself was a direct act of defiance. Bartenders in New York speakeasies mixed smuggled rum with rye whiskey and brandy, added a splash of grenadine and lemon juice, and named the whole thing after the boundary the government kept failing to enforce. Every ingredient had crossed that line illegally. The rum came up from the Caribbean on boats that ran without lights. The brandy was French stock that had passed through Canada and then across the border in trucks with false floors. Ordering a 12-mile limit in a speakeasy was not just drinking something illegal. It was raising a glass to every boat that had outrun the Coast Guard to bring it there. The name told you exactly where your drink had been and exactly which law it had broken to reach your hand. Number 2. Jersey Lightning. Across the Hudson River in the orchards of northern New Jersey, farmers had been distilling apple brandy for generations before Prohibition ever started. When the Volstead Act hit, those same stills kept running, but now every drop they produced was a federal crime. The Applejack that came out was raw, unaged, and strong enough to knock a grown man off a bar stool. New York speakeasy owners bought it by the jug because it was close, it was cheap, and the supply never dried up. Jersey Lightning had a reputation. The home distillation process concentrated not just ethanol, but methanol, the kind of alcohol that attacks the nervous system. Drinkers who put away too much of it woke up with splitting headaches, blurred vision, and hands that would not stop shaking. Some never saw clearly again. But it kept coming across the river by the barrel, loaded onto ferries and driven through the Holland Tunnel in cars with the back seats ripped out. In the rougher speakeasies south of 14th Street, Jersey Lightning was the house pour served straight in a short glass with nothing to cut the burn. The bartender did not ask if you wanted it. If you sat down and put your money on the bar, that is what you got. Number 1. Rotgut Whiskey. The most common illegal drink in Prohibition-era New York had no name that anyone was proud of. Rotgut was the generic term for the cheapest bootleg whiskey available, made from whatever alcohol a bootlegger could get, cut with water, colored to look like something it was not, and sold for whatever the market would bear. It was poured in every speakeasy, blind pig, and backroom bar in the city, from the Bowery to Harlem. More Americans died from drinking rotgut during Prohibition than from any other single cause connected to the ban. The federal government's own policy of poisoning industrial alcohol contributed directly to the death toll. The numbers run into the thousands. These were not thrill seekers who chose to take a risk. These were people who ordered what they believed was whiskey and got something their body could not survive. Rotgut did not taste like rebellion. It did not taste like freedom. For a lot of New Yorkers, it was simply the drink that was available, and for some of them, it was the last drink they ever had. 25 drinks poured in the dark in a city that decided the law could have the streets but could not have the bars. Prohibition lasted 13 years. When it ended on December 5, 1933, New Yorkers walked into bars that had been speakeasies the day before and ordered a legal drink for the first time in their adult lives. Most of them said the same thing. It tasted exactly the way it always had. If this list surprised you, leave a comment with the one drink you would have actually ordered, and if you have not subscribed yet, now is a good time.